Well, hello and welcome back to the Spoken Word. My name is Travis, your host. And today we're going to be entering into one of probably the most imagination sparking parts of the Bible, at least in kind of a dark and mysterious kind of way. What I'm talking about is the opening lines of Genesis chapter 6. Just so we know where we're at on the timeline, we have this crisis that has come into the world where God's space and our space have been torn apart by mankind's sin and our choice to do things our own way and not be obedient to God and to live in harmony with Him and with the creation that He's made and go our own way. And as part of this conflict, we have this little nugget of hope that someone someday is going to deal with this. But as we learned in our previous episode, we see generation after generation of humans who are just not living up to that goal. Instead of ruling over beasts, we become beasts, to borrow from a series that I listened to from the Bible Project. So we just see this downward spiral, essentially. And we get to this point in Genesis chapter 6 where the author gives us a little picture into what this world looked like. So I'm just going to read this from the top here in Genesis 6 in the Christian Standard Bible version. It says the following: When mankind began to multiply on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of mankind were beautiful, and they took any they chose as wives for themselves. The Lord said, My spirit will not remain with mankind forever, because they are corrupt. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth, both in those days and afterward, when the sons of God came to the daughters of mankind, who bore children to them. They were the powerful men of old, the famous men. When the Lord saw that human wickedness was widespread on the earth, and that every inclination of the human mind was nothing but evil all the time, the Lord regretted that He had made man on the earth, and He was deeply grieved. Then the Lord said, I will wipe mankind, whom I created, off the face of the earth, together with the animals, creatures that crawl, and birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. Noah, however, found favor with the Lord. Noah is this guy who we meet at the very end of the genealogy in Genesis chapter 5. It talks about Noah here a little bit, but I'm going to skip down to verse 11 because the text kind of reiterates the state of the world. It says, Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with wickedness. God saw how corrupt the earth was, for every creature had corrupted its way on the earth. And then it goes on and talks about God telling Noah about his plan to hit the great reset button on the world. So what do we see here? We see humans acting corruptly. We see that even animals themselves, it says every creature had corrupted its way on the earth. So we have humans going sideways. We have creatures going sideways. We have this funny business with the sons of God, whoever those were. We have mentions of these Nephilim running around, whoever those guys were. And we have God somehow involved here. He says, My spirit will not remain with mankind forever. Other translations will put this, my spirit will not strive or contend with, fight with, right? Mankind forever, because they're corrupt. Their days are going to be 120 years. So God puts a judgment day on here and says, 120 years from now, I'm going to judge. So I just want to sit in this little section here for a while and imagine the darkness of the world at this time and help us paint that picture a little more thoroughly. Sometimes I think we run through these sections of the Bible and don't really sit with them enough, because I want us to understand how wicked this world is in this time period. Because if you just imagine this as, oh, this is all hunky-dory and the world is fine, everybody's just, maybe they say a curse word every once in a while or something, and then God wipes them all out with the flood, that seems like an overreaction, right? I want to sit here a little bit and help us understand how dark of a world this is describing. First of all, we have this mention that every inclination of the human heart is just evil all the time. Okay. I don't know that you can really think about a time period in human history in recent memory where that's been true. Just imagine you can have people like Hitler murdering millions of Jews. You have people like Stalin murdering millions of their own people. You have people like Genghis Khan wiping out whatever it was, like a third of the human race at his time. Like you go take those types of people and fill the whole earth with people like that. And oh, by the way, they don't just die of old age at like age 70. They die of old age at age 100. So they have a really long time to get really good at being really corrupt. It is human wickedness that's just without end. And people don't just die. So that's one point. The second is that you have even animals being somehow corrupted in even their behavior towards each other. There would be some people who would claim that when you see things like dinosaur fossils and these like really menacing killing machines in the fossil record, that these creatures were alive on the earth at this time and not afterwards. Whether or not you take that view, I think that it's maybe a good approximation of what the world was looking like at this time. Like even the animals are like these fearsome monsters. And then you have this passage where it says that the sons of God saw that the daughters of mankind were beautiful, and they took any they chose as wives for themselves. Okay, so what's going on here? So people have had various interpretations of this. Some would say, oh, the sons of God, those were the good humans, right, from the line of Seth. And they're like intermarrying with women from the line of Cain or something like that. And I don't really think that's what this is going after. Because why, as we've noticed, the text here is very touch and go. It doesn't really say much about like biographical data unless there's something really significant. Like the genealogies, and we've seen in the previous chapter, will take a pause every once in a while and say, oh, by the way, this guy got taken away by God. Oh, by the way, this guy over here was super wicked and had multiple wives and murdered people for no reason. So it really only stops the flow of the story if there's something really important happening here. Also, why the poetic license? Like, why be so cryptic if all you're really saying is men married women? Because that's all the descendants of Seth marrying the descendants of Cain would imply, right? So that's not remarkable. Oh, congratulations. Men and women were married and had babies. Welcome to planet Earth, third rock from the sun, right? There's nothing remarkable about that. So the fact that the author has stopped here indicates to me that there is probably something more to this text. There's another interpretive point here. We see in the Old Testament that sometimes there's this class of beings just collectively called the Elohim is the Hebrew word. That word really has to be interpreted based upon context, because the word God, referring to the deity of the Jews, is also just called Elohim sometimes. So you have to figure out, okay, are we talking about the class of like spiritual entities, or are we specifically talking about the chief Elohim? And these entities are sometimes called the sons of God. We see this in the book of Job, for example. So that being said, maybe there's something else going on here. Like maybe these are like angelic kind of entities that are happening or that are involved here, which sounds very bizarre, right? Because I just said, yes, on a live recording, I just said that there's a possibility that this text would indicate that we have had in the past some kind of weird angelic human hybrid creatures running around, right? The offspring of this intermingling between the sons of God and the daughters of mankind. To be fair, though, the question would be, okay, as I mentioned before, I'm a random modern Western person trying to read this ancient Hebrew text. The question would be, how have people treated this text in the past? And there's a couple of references that I think are the most strong that are within the Bible. Here's one of those references. This is coming from the New Testament. Okay. So these are followers of Jesus who are writing letters, and they're coming out of a Jewish tradition. So these guys would have the interpretive legacy of their time and place. So 2000 years ago, then we can ask ourselves, okay, how did Jews 2000 years ago think about this early text? So this is in Jude, and this is a really short, interesting little letter. And he comes down to verse 5 and 6 here. I'll just read through these. This is Jude, who's actually the half brother of Jesus. And he says, "Now I want to remind you, although you came to know all these things once and for all, that Jesus saved the people out of Egypt and later destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not keep their own position, but abandoned their proper dwelling, he is kept in eternal chains and deep darkness for judgment on the great day." Okay. So he talks about angels leaving their proper dwelling. So that's interesting. And I have another kind of passage that is maybe a kind of a side glance at this text. He says, this is First Peter. So this is one of Jesus' own 12 apostles, the Apostle Peter. He says in his first letter, First Peter, chapter 3, verse 18, he said, "For Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring you to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive by the Spirit, in which he also went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison, who in the past were disobedient, when God patiently waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared." So we have a couple of internal references in the Bible here to like spirits being disobedient. We have angels leaving their proper dwelling. Like, what exactly is going on here? Because in the entirety of the Old Testament, there is not another reference to anything like this. None of these events are mentioned. Unless you want to go and make a double reading of some passages in Isaiah and things like that. But Peter specifically says that what he's talking about, these disobedient spirits were doing their thing during the time of Noah, which is the very time period that we're talking about here. There's a couple of intriguing things indicating, okay, maybe these were angelic or spiritual entities that left their dwelling and were somehow involved here, which would lend credence to the idea of the sons of God referenced here in Genesis 6 being angelic entities. The other text that I'll mention here in just a minute is called First Enoch. This is not a book that you will find in your Bible. It is ascribed to that guy named Enoch that we mentioned in our last episode, who walked with God and then was taken away by God. That is most likely not the case, because this text dates to somewhere in the neighborhood of 300, 200 BC, somewhere in that range, later than the Bible portrays as being alive. And I have a copy of it here with me on my desk. And whenever you read through this thing, it really does begin to read like pulp fiction at some points. And it's just really not on the same scale as biblical authoritative text. This is not treated as authoritative by the Catholic Church. It is not treated as authoritative by most of the Orthodox Church. It is not treated as authoritative by Protestant churches. So this is not on the same scale of reliability as these other, books or texts that are collected in your Bible. Also, we can see pretty clearly that although this text was around at the time of Jesus, In fact, there's a direct quotation of it in the book of Jude, and there are fragments of it that were present in the famous Dead Sea Scrolls, which date somewhere around the time of Jesus, plus or minus a couple hundred years. So we know that this text was around and that Jews read it, but we have far fewer manuscripts of this thing than we do stuff like other books of the Bible that we find in modern Bibles. So this isn't up there with Isaiah or book of Jeremiah or anything like that, right? This is not on the same scale of reliability, or seemingly just because of how few copies of it are around. It certainly wasn't as widely circulated or respected as much as these other texts. But nevertheless, even if it's just pulp fiction from circa 200 to 300 BC, it still gives us a window into the mind of at least some Jewish people during that time, and puts the question to them, okay, how did you guys think about this text? We're going to jump back 2,300 years, 2,200 years, somewhere in that range, and see how people who were raised in the Jewish faith, basking in these texts since they were little kids, how did some of those people think about Genesis 6 here? Let me read for you a kind of text here in Enoch that mentions this time period. This comes from the 6th chapter of this little work, and it says, "When the sons of men had multiplied, in those days beautiful and comely daughters were born to them. And the watchers, the sons of heaven, saw them and desired them. And they said to one another, Come, let us choose for ourselves wives for the daughters of men, and let us beget children from ourselves." And then he goes into a little diatribe about these watchers squabbling amongst themselves, and he gives some of their names. And then it says, this is the 7th chapter, says, "These and all the others with them took for themselves wives from among them such as they chose, and they began to go into them and to defile themselves through them, and to teach them sorcery and charms, and to reveal to them the cutting of roots and plants," whatever that was. "And they conceived from them and bore to them great giants. And the giants begot Nephilim, and the Nephilim were born Eliud." There's some marketing around that. Don't exactly know what that Eliud word means. But the point being is that these watchers take wives for themselves. The offspring of those relationships are giants, and the giants begot Nephilim. Okay. And it says they were growing in accordance with their greatness. They were devouring the labor of all the sons of men, and men were not able to supply them. And the giants began to kill men and to devour them, and they began to sin against the birds and the beasts and the creeping things and the fish, and to devour one another's flesh. And they drank the blood. Then the earth brought accusation against the lawless ones. And then we have some more action that happens here. And then we have some other good angels that show up and bring condemnation against these guys and talk to God about it. And then there's this like judgment that's brought upon these creatures. Anyway, so circa 200 to 300 BC, there's at least some Jewish thought that is looking at this text and saying that the sons of God were angelic entities. They had kids with women, and those offspring were giants, and those giants led to the Nephilim, which is a word that we see later on in, I believe, Joshua, when some Israelite spies go out and they look around in the land that they're supposed to conquer, and they see these like huge people, and they come running back with their tails tucked between their legs, and they say, "Hey, the Nephilim are here. We saw the Nephilim." So there's this idea that these are giants. Looking at this text myself, it doesn't explicitly say that the offspring of these unholy hybrids were the Nephilim. It just says, by the way, the Nephilim were around when the sons of God came to the daughters of mankind. So whether they're connected to this hybridization or not, don't know. The Book of Enoch writers certainly did. But all that to be said, this is a very strange chapter. Thinking about this from a larger perspective, there are some problems theologically with having these hybrid entities running around, because then you would have to ask yourself, okay, how do they fit into the overall scheme of like salvation? And are they human? Are they considered demonic? Does Christ's blood cover them or not? Or, there's just a lot of theological questions that would come up if you spend a lot of time thinking about this. Perhaps one possibility is that these demonic entities, these sons of God, had some possession over men and used those men as their vehicle by which to, quote, have children on their own. So maybe you're envisioning a world not necessarily with like angels standing around in and of themselves like the Book of Enoch would lead you to believe, but maybe it's more like these are wicked, demon-possessed, warlords essentially who are making these. So again, I don't know. It's a very touch and go kind of chapter. The scriptures don't dwell upon it very much, and you'll see that is a very common pattern in the Old Testament and the New Testament as well, where the nature of darkness, nature of evil, and wicked things are not really contemplated much. So it kind of moves on to the point of God entering into this story. So the point being of all this discussion is, let's just sit back for a moment and think about how dark this world would be. So let's recap. We have humans who are extremely wicked, living for hundreds and hundreds of years. You have angelic entities apparently collectively skydiving out of heaven and making unholy hybrids with women. You have giants running around, which can't be good. And according to, the Book of Enoch, they're seen as like devouring each other and being bad to the animals and destroying the works of man and all this kind of stuff. You have animals that are even corrupted and wicked and are just these killing machines. And God is looking at this world going, okay, I have some regrets about this work. And in this dark, murderous, fantastic kind of world, this is getting up there with Lord of the Rings kind of stuff here. This is a wicked, twisted, warped world. And over and against that is this little passage where it says, this is Genesis 6, verse 9, these are the family records of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among his contemporaries. Noah walked with God. Over and against all of that, you have this little light in the person of Noah. So the question is, how is God going to deal with this wickedness and at the same time be faithful to Noah? Okay. That's one of the darkest chapters of the Bible. Certainly a lot of time could be spent expanding your own personal fiction of how you think this world would have looked. And I would encourage you to do that, because it really gets you into the mindset of Genesis chapter 6 and realizing how wicked this world was. With that, we'll be coming out of these dark days and see what God does with it in the next episode. So I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for listening, and I will see you in the next episode. God bless.